Hello and welcome to episode 50 of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast where we are taking a look at the Walt Disney so-called animated classics in chronological order, judging each film on its own merits to decide which ones are truly worthy of that title of an animated classic, albeit in our case a more prestigious, more refined Waly Gisnep animated classic. As always, I am Liam and I am joined by my very good friend Ben. Ben, which film is up for consideration this week?
This week, Liam, we are taking a very strange left turn after princess films like Frozen and Tangled, and we're heading to the bizarre sci-fi East meets West culture mashup of San Francisco, because we are looking at 2014's Big Hero 6, based on the Marvel comic book property of the same name. As always, we're going to be talking a little bit about our experiences with the film, the production and background, go through the plot, talk about who we think the sexiest character is, before finally deciding whether we think Big Hero 6 is worthy of being added to our own list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. So to start, Liam, what's your background with this film?
I remember being really taken aback when this film was announced. I know that Disney acquired Marvel in like 2009, but I never expected them to, kind of cross the boundaries and mix them. Like, they keep their properties separate. They just own them all as a ridiculous entertainment monopoly giant. So for Disney to say, hey, we're actually going to do an adaptation of a Marvel property as one of our animated classics, and it's going to be separate and distinct from the MCU. And that got me really excited that, they might do more things like that, and they've got this whole host of IPs through Marvel that they could do all sorts of things with, but we still haven't seen anything else other than this that's outside of the MCU, which is a bit strange. And it also stuck out to me as a bit of a pattern where it's like Tangled, non-princess film, Frozen, non-princess film. Luckily they broke that with the next one, but I kept thinking that, remember back in the 90s how you had like the A team and the B team, which very quickly became the A team and the other A team. It very much felt like you'd have, your princess team and your kind of more experimental team. So yeah, I was, a bit taken aback, but very excited, and ended up watching this in the cinema. What about yourself?
So it's at this point where this was the first Disney film I saw after having gone back and watched all the animated classics, rewatching the ones I'd seen before and watching for the first time all the ones I'd missed. So I was very much in a Disney canon mindset by this point. Actually, maybe Frozen was the first one, but anyway, I was very much in that mindset. Going into this film, I had absolutely no expectations one way or the other. I don't recall there being a lot of marketing, certainly not that I saw for this film. I knew the name, and let's be honest, the name tells you basically nothing about this film. Regardless of what I do or don't think about this film, I think the name is bad.
I would argue that not only does it not tell you anything about this film, it is almost deliberately misleading. Because, and don't get me wrong, the original property it's based on is very much a superhero team. The superhero team in this film is definitely not the point of the film.
No, and it also implies there's 5 other films that came before it.
Shall we dive into the plot then? We begin with this beautiful shot of, I assume it still has the same name, of the Golden Gate Bridge, and it immediately sets the tone of this world. And I think the visual design of this film, granted much of it comes from the source material of mixing, hey, it's San Francisco and Tokyo, though it feels a bit more kind of like Kyoto inspired to me, with the very distinct kind of like temple imagery that you would find more in Kyoto than somewhere like Tokyo. But we've got our San Francisco, and I think it's a really good way to do a modern story with a twist of being like, it's an alternate world, or, potentially a futuristic world. Like, hey, this is a future that we could see, yada, 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 all the possibilities. And it's just a really great way of having something be familiar. And so you've got, similar rules, like there's not going to be any magic here. This is the modern world. They're saying that you can have the modern world. But are talking dogs magic? They talk to each other.
Dogs in this film?
No, but Oliver and Company is set in the real world. So the rule doesn't always apply. It's not mad. Talking dogs aren't magic. They talk to each other. It's fine. The dogs in this world probably talk to each other as well, but we never see any. It's a apocalyptic future with no dogs. There's cats. I feel I've got off track already.
The presence or absence of dogs has literally nothing to do with this film.
So we open on San Francisco. Immediately, very striking, very clear world design. Again, we owe that really to the source material. And we focus in on a back alley where it's basically Robot Wars is taking place. And I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a fun little opening. We're introduced to the fact that this world has robots in. And we're also introduced to our main character, Hiro Hamada, who's a sort of... boy genius might be the wrong term because I think that has a certain trope to it, but he's a 13-year-old boy who is a genius when it comes to robotics and engineering. And he basically rolls this sort of backstreet... mob boss is probably a bit generous, but this thug who's got this big robot, and he deliberately makes his robot look weak and pathetic, loses, then raises the stakes and absolutely trounces the guy.
I really enjoy this character introduction. I think it tells us everything we need to know about Hiro straight away, that he's kind of a hustler and a bit of a slacker, but is clearly very exceptional in the fields he is interested in this case, robotics. And he's someone who kind of like coasts and does not apply himself, which is just a very good setup for him.
I think if this was closer to the real world Robot Wars, there'd be a lot more unexpected breakdowns and fires, because that's my main memory of that show, where one of the robots would just stop moving anticlimactically. But, you know, that's not exciting for a film. I accept that.
There's nothing better than working on what is essentially just a saw on wheels for 6 months, and then it just not working when you finally get there. That's a very good point. Robot Wars, it was never robots. It was just weapons on wheels.
Which is arguably also a better title. Unless they do have sentience and we're just pretending they don't, which is more horrifying. As you can imagine, the local tough is not particularly happy about being hustled, so Hiro, before he gets beaten up by a bunch of fully grown adults beating up a child, his older brother Tadashi rides in on a motorbike and saves him, and they ride off while Tadashi shouts exposition at him.
Yeah, I was about to ask, how did you know it was his brother? Yeah, if there's one thing that's immediately a bit weird with this film, it's that they're very heavy-handed with a lot of the exposition. Like, they don't really have a graceful way of getting things out. And you don't necessarily need to say these things. Like, the actions of Tadashi tell me it's his brother. Them going to the same house at the end of the scene tells me it's his brother. Hiro being out late at night doing robot hustling tells me he's a child genius. But the film is like, we can't trust the audience. Let's just throw it all in just to be 100%.
I think for the most part after this, the film deals with it a lot better. But yeah, this first sort of 5-10 minutes, I think it's a bit blunt.
My favourite example of this, so just to cut ahead, they have a conversation about Hiro applying himself. They get caught by the cops who arrest them because betting on robot fighting is illegal. And they get sent home. And they go back to their conversation about, you know, wanting to find a purpose and apply yourself. And Tadashi says something about, like, what would mum and dad think? And Hiro just responds with, I don't know, they died when I was 3, don't you remember? And I'm like, why did nobody at Disney go, we can write a better version of this?
Yeah, I mean, the line, what would mum and dad think, and mum and dad not being there, basically tells you it all. And even the version of the line, how would I know, as the response, again tells you that. I suppose they wanted to be clear that it wasn't mum and dad had abandoned them, mum and dad were dead. But again, there's probably a more elegant way of doing that. Like, they look towards, you know, there's a photo on the wall of them on their flaming unicycle or something that's very clearly implied that they've died.
A photo of them hustling a backstreet bot wrestler crime boss.
A photo of their weapon on wheels catching fire.
And as you say, that's basically all of the clunky exposition done with. Hiro heads out again to go bot fighting. Tadashi's like, if you're going to go, I'm going to come with you and make sure you're okay. And basically just tricks him by saying, let me just stop by my lab quickly to pick some things up. Hope you don't mind hanging out with all my nerdy friends for a moment and seeing the stupid, boring projects each of them is working on.
Yeah, this is a really fun sequence. As you say, Tadashi takes them to basically like robots university, I suppose. The University of Robotics. And we meet all his friends, as you say, and they're working on all these amazing technology. We've got Gogo, who's working on wheels that are kind of suspended and don't have any friction. We've got Wasabi, who's working on a lethal laser grid to destroy apples. I don't really know what benefit his technology has, to be honest.
My favourite part about Wasabi is that should not just be out in the open. I think the only indication is like a line on the floor saying do not cross, and the lasers are invisible, so it's like, what the hell are you doing, Wasabi?
For someone who's characterised as very meticulous, this seems like a huge oversight. We've got Honey Lemon, who is doing all sorts of stuff with chemicals and changing the chemical and molecular structure of things. And we've got Fred, who's a stoner waster, who is a hanger-on. He doesn't even go to the university.
No, he's just... How can he be the mascot? I've never understood this. They're just like...
Maybe he's the self-appointed mascot. There's no team.
Yeah, I somehow doubt this University of Robotics has a sports team.
Not a human one, anyway.
No, they focus mostly on weapons on wheels for their sporting events.
I'm just going to say it right out the door. I think the gang in Big Hero 6 is the best example of this in Disney. I'm not saying they're the best side characters, just to be clear. You know, they're not sort of Cogsworth and Lumiere or even like Kronk levels, but I think each of them, they don't outstay their welcome. You get a very clear idea of what each of those characters are. They all have a little bit of a mini arc in there. I think for the most part, I can do without Fred, but for the most part, I think they're quite funny. They're quite likable as well. Like, I generally like this gang of characters.
First of all, TJ Miller aside, I quite like Fred. Secondly, this is probably the best roster of characters we've had since Atlantis.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Where everyone is very distinct and only really as shallow as they need to be. You don't need to have big, deep character arcs. You just need to have kind of enough there that they're not a caricature. Which, arguably with Fred, bit of a caricature, but what they go for with him works without it being as annoying as, let's say, Mole. So to me, this is very much an evolution of that idea, and I think this is just a really good cast of characters, and it's a very efficient introduction to them all, much like the scene in Atlantis.
Absolutely, and I think as well, whilst they are used for comedy, they aren't comedy side characters, and I think that's a big difference, because in this sequence, yeah, there's some jokes in it, but it's also about showing the wonder of what these people are doing and the kind of amazingness of it. And I think generally in this film, one thing that I think really does a great job of drawing you into the world is there's explanations for everything. Now, obviously, those are science fiction-y elements. We're not necessarily saying, oh, there's a perfectly believable scientific version of each of these things. But in the science of this world, we get explanations for everything that's happening, which, again, I think really helps ground it. And it makes it clear that we're talking about science and engineering, we're not talking about magic.
Yeah, I think this is just a really good kind of mission statement inspiration to get kids involved with STEM. Like, it's not realistic, but depending on where you work, like if you're going into engineering, nothing they show here is, you know, a world away in terms of science fiction. It's all exaggerated, but these are projects that people work on every day. They're just heightened, exaggerated versions of it. I think it's a really good kind of sales pitch for STEM, basically.
And then we're finally introduced to what Tadashi's been working on, which is a nursing/healthcare support robot, which is the big, white, inflatable, cuddly Baymax.
Now, I'm not sure why Tadashi gets his own office and none of the others do.
Give Wasabi his own office. You'll get fewer casualties that way.
But my word if he doesn't have my favourite project. I've mentioned when we discussed Dumbo and Stitch, I think Baymax might be my personal favourite adorable Disney character.
And why is that?
If you've ever seen the design of the Baymax from the comics, he's very much a robot that can kind of morph by putting different suits on. And he's a lot more threatening. He's like a big scary monster. It's, you know, hey, what would a 14-year-old boy design? Because that's what he is in the comics. And for them to take that premise and come up with this is so clever and so charming, because basically all Baymax is a big, cuddly, inflatable vinyl nurse with little beady eyes and the most deliberate movements. I think they've nailed that element of robotics, at least with the Tadashi version of Baymax, which we'll get to, where they constantly seem to be, examining their environment and reacting to it and making very small, deliberate movements. And it's those small, deliberate movements that make Baymax just so endearing the first time we see them.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I'd go as far as to say, of every animated character I've seen, Baymax is the best done in terms of characterization through animation. I'm not going to say whether I think Baymax is the best written character ever. I certainly think Baymax is a fantastic character, but the physicality and the space and the movement and the ever-changing dynamic of this inflatable body that he's got and how he has to squeeze through things, and sometimes he deflates or reinflates, and he's a bit clumsy and he's slow. It's faultless. It's so, so well done. If this character didn't speak, I feel I'd almost get as much understanding of this character than we do with the voice and the lines, but I love the voice and the lines as well.
Yeah, Scott Adsit's voice performance for Baymax is absolutely perfect. It manages to convey this idea of being programmed to care. Like, it's clearly following procedure and protocol, and everything that Baymax is doing is programmed, but it is designed to be as appealing and reassuring as possible. And they nailed that premise with the voice performance. Clearly impressed, but realizing that Tadashi is tricking him, Hiro's like, right, this was great, time to go bot fighting. On the way out, they bump into Professor Callaghan, and after showing off the robot he is using and being told that, yeah, the parts you're using, Callaghan invented those, Hiro realizes who he's talking to, clearly a very prominent figure within the world of robotics, and this seems to be like the final straw that wins Hiro over, and he decides, this is where I want to go. I get to work on cool projects and study under people I admire. One thing I really like about this interaction that I only really picked up on this time is that the robot Hiro is using is an adaptation of parts that Callaghan made. And one thing that we see with Hiro throughout the film is his ability is taking something other people have made and improving on it. Like taking the experience of others and adding his twist to it, which comes up throughout the film, and actually I think is really important to like his main arc within the film of like someone else's experience, I'm going to do it better.
So Hiro asks how he can get into the university, and then we cut to the following morning where Tadashi answers. Presumably they were just in stony silence until then. He explains that every year there's basically a fair where young wannabe engineers and scientists can pitch their robotics ideas and win basically a scholarship onto the program. And we get a little montage of Hiro trying to think of ideas. We get a nice little fake out of, we start hearing some inspirational music, and then it just winds down because he can't think of anything to do.
Not just any inspirational music, it's specifically Eye of the Tiger.
Yeah, it's a nice fake out on the old training montage section. And Tadashi, seeing Hiro's struggles, picks him up and hangs him upside down over his shoulders, telling him to get a new perspective on things. Again, I think this whole relationship between Tadashi and Hiro is really believable. I think the age gap is just right because Tadashi is an adult, and he's a young adult and he's still immature and got a lot to learn, but also he is the father figure to Hiro. Again, this is much more a Nani and Lilo relationship, albeit a lot less dysfunctional than this is a Elsa and Anna relationship.
Inspired by his brother's encouragement, Hiro goes back to the drawing board, comes up with an idea, and we see him working away at some project. And all we see of it in like a kind of fast forward montage is he's in his garage and big blue bins keep appearing one by one where he's clearly working on something that has like lots of individual parts, and that's all we see at this point. And I think it's just a really nice quick montage, and then we're at the exhibition basically.
Yeah, I feel another film, this would have been the midpoint, maybe even the finale of the film, but nope, we get straight on with it. We're at the exhibition and we get to see all these fun ideas of what cutting-edge technology might look like in San Francisco. And Tadashi and all the friends are there. We've also got Aunt Cass, who looks after Tadashi and Hiro, who is a minor character in this film, I'm going to say. I think, again, she's really well written. She's I get what this character's about straight away. I think she's a good mix of funny and heart, and again, she's incredibly believable in terms of how she supports and deals with what Hiro and Tadashi go through.
It's great. She's clearly, supportive. We don't have a Lilo and Nani situation where they're on their own, but we also need that parental vacuum so that Tadashi can fill that sort of father figure role for Hiro, but it can't be exclusively him. So I think they knew what they needed and they hit the nail on the head with Aunt Cass. What
they needed was clearly what the new Spider-Man films felt they needed as well, and that is a hot ant.
We'll get to that. So we're at the exhibition. One thing I really like, Disney wastes no time. We don't see other people's projects because that's not important. We just jump straight in with Hiro's. He's a bit awkward at the start, a bit nervous, but his presentation starts and we see what he's been working on, which is similar to the robot he was battling with. He's micronized them, I suppose.
Miniaturized?
Miniaturized, thank you very much. We'll cut that.
No.
He's miniaturized the robots and created the more impressive thing, a neural transmitter that reads his mind, and all of these combined, he can control just a swarm of microbots using his thoughts, and just gives this ridiculous presentation where I'm just like, this is world-changing technology right here.
It's so cool. Again, it's really well done in terms of being visual, and from an animation standpoint, again, this is an example of, the ice in Frozen, the fur on Sully, where to have this, I guess, pile of different moving objects works incredibly well. Like, it doesn't look like a swarm texture, right? This is thousands of things moving separately, and there's a particular bit where Hiro takes off the transmitter and they all just fall into a pile on the floor. The physics on it are perfect.
I have to believe that they were all individually animated and that some poor animator out in Burbank just slowly went mad.
You think they gave it to one person?
Yes.
If you could just do the textures for the home living room, and if you could do all the microbot animations for the entire film.
The presentation goes really well, and Hiro is approached by our red herring voiced
Don't
once
spoil
again.
it, Liam. Yeah, Prince Hans comes over.
Voiced once again by Alan Tudyk in the form of billionaire industrialist Alistair Krei, who approaches Hiro and says, this technology is amazing, it will literally change the world, come work for me, which I think is a reasonable offer. But Callaghan interrupts and is like, look, you can either work for this greedy, selfish asshole, or you can come work with us and continue to develop your project and make sure it's the best it can possibly be. We won't pay you, though.
Callaghan starts out as if he's really trying to be like, I'm framing this for you, Hiro, as here's your two choices, and I'm going to present them completely objectively. You can either stay here at this leading university and make your product the best it can be, or you can team up with Satan over here and ruin the world. It's your choice.
I really like this interaction, and obviously Hiro doesn't care about money. He wanted to go to the university, that's why he did this. So he says no to Krei. Tadashi interrupts him when Krei walks away and has one of the microbots in his pocket. They get that back off him. And Callaghan immediately presents Hiro with the letter of introduction. He's won the place at the university. Cut to everyone celebrating, ready to head back to the cafe for a celebratory meal. Tadashi just wants to pull Hiro aside for a moment and just sort of tell him how proud he is of him and how happy he is that he's going to be, at college with him. And it's just a really sweet moment.
And it all just works out fine, doesn't it, from there?
Pretty much, yeah. If by fine you mean a fire breaks out, which Tadashi runs into and immediately dies.
Yeah, I'm going to say this. I love the way this is handled because, again, I think a lesser film, we'd have a twist about how the fire started or an explanation. We never get that in this film. There was a tragic fire. Tadashi realises Professor Callaghan's still in there, rushes in to save him, then flames engulf the whole building, and that's it. All Hiro's left with is Tadashi's hat, and it says it all. It's really well done. And again, that's how life is. It's not always a big dramatic, you get to say a heartfelt moment to someone, it's a blink and they can be gone.
I love the moment where Hiro stops Tadashi and he's like, he's alive in there, someone's got to help him, and No Thought just runs in after him. Quick note, never run into a burning building.
That's just one of our many PSAs.
Unless, of course, you are a trained firefighter. Please ignore that advice.
And if you are a trained firefighter, don't listen to this podcast for any kind of training.
Oh, this is so confusing. They keep changing their mind. Cut to a kind of joint funeral, I suppose, of Callaghan and Tadashi. Again, it's all...
I bet Fred had a joint funeral, know what I mean?
Once again, it's all done visually. We see the funeral. We cut back to Hiro and Tadashi's home. We see Aunt Cass talking to Tadashi's friends, and then just pan up to see Hiro just alone on the stairs by himself, which is what alone means.
You're learning so much in this podcast. One of the really subtle nice notes I like about this, and this might sound silly, is how Tadashi's friends they've tied their hair up or back for the funeral. And I know that sounds silly, but again, it's such a simple attention to detail, but it makes these characters believable, because of course they're not going to have their hair down and shaggy or, just kind of tousled or whatever, because it's a funeral and they want to show respect. And again, if they hadn't done it, I wouldn't have noticed it, but the fact they've done it and done it well makes it stand out and makes me care about these characters that little bit more.
Look, if a turkey mayor can bathe in a full outfit and his hat, I don't mind if Tadashi's friends show up in their lab coats and bright primary colour outfits to his funeral.
And yeah, as you say, Hiro is just crushed. And
that's the film.
And much the same, and that's the film. Who's the sexiest character? So, in a similar way to where we had a pause with Meet the Robinsons and said, if you've not seen this and you have any interest in watching this, go away and watch this film. I'm going to make the same caveat here before we go on, because, yeah, that's your chance. Pause the podcast, go and watch the film. I'd be surprised if you're listening to this podcast and haven't seen it, but I just want to give that disclosure. Because what follows is one of the best written explorations of grief I know of in any media, because we get these sequences of Hiro grieving, but it's not in a big dramatic televisual way. What it is him sitting in his room listlessly. He's not going downstairs. We see Aunt Cass bringing in his next meal and taking out the old uneaten one. She tells him that he can still join the course, it's not too late, even though it's been a few weeks. And the bit that is simultaneously fantastic and heartbreaking is whenever Hiro's asked, he's like, no, I'm okay. And that is what people who are grieving and struggling emotionally do. They don't have a big dramatic monologue. They don't paint the wall black. They sit there and they withdraw, but they tell people they're okay and that they're all fine.
Fred would paint the wall black. I really love that Disney advertised a superhero origin story and snuck in an exploration of grief instead. I can't think of any other example where they've used that format, a superhero origin story, and that's what it is. If you've seen a superhero origin story, it's going to hit all of those beats. But to make it stand out, they're like, let's use that format to tell a story about human grief and the grieving process. And that's so impressive to me, and it really surprised me the first time I saw this film.
I think, with the exception of The Dark Knight, which obviously is a very different film, I think this is probably the best superhero film. I certainly think this is better than everything in the MCU. And it's an origin story about grief and loss, which is very, very common for superheroes, and this is the only one I care about. And this is a children's film. All those times Batman's parents have been shot in that alley or Uncle Ben's been killed by a mugger, it's fine, but this, I actually care about these characters.
So the distinction between this and those examples is those examples typically use grief as motivation to become a hero. This film uses becoming a hero as a method for coping with grief, which is completely different and entirely unique.
And interesting. And as part of this, when Hiro accidentally hurts himself, cry of pain is the trigger that wakes up Baymax, who Hiro didn't realise was alongside Tadashi's possessions, and Baymax comes to life and wants to help his patient Hiro heal.
I think they nail the comedy in this scene, where clearly we've just had quite a traumatic moment. We've seen a character in those initial stages of grief, and then Baymax comes into it, and I think a lesser film would have upped the comedy to kind of lighten the mood. And instead, Baymax is just, it's quite subdued. They're just following their programming, asking the simple questions. Are you hurt? Where does it hurt? And Hiro is constantly just kind of fobbing him off and being like, it's fine, leave me alone. Baymax diagnoses Hiro with puberty in a weird moment in the film, which is weird because Baymax later diagnoses Hiro with like depression and grief, basically, because of the situation he's in. And I feel this is really the moment they should have done that, because they basically have the same scene twice, but one's played for laughs and the joke is puberty and he kind of fobs it off, and then it happens again later, but it's the proper one. It's just a bit weird.
I suppose it's going along part of the steps of Hiro's journey through grief, because at this stage he's not even willing to acknowledge that that's what the problem is. And later on he is still in denial about how to deal with that grief, but he is at least acknowledging that that's what's caused the problem. He just doesn't realise what the solution is. And again, I think one of the reasons this relationship between Baymax and Hiro works so well is Baymax is telling Hiro what he needs, and Hiro is deliberately deaf to it. But because of Baymax being this nurse robot, and also the way he's animated and performed, which we've talked about, he's not a smart aleck. He's not trying to trick her into doing something. He's incredibly simple and persistent. And again, you know, there's a world where the robot is playing Hiro to try and get him over this, and obviously that's not what Baymax does. Baymax is way more straightforward than that. He does what he says and he says what he does.
The distinction of Baymax being simple, I think, is really nice, because you can have a character who is simple but not stupid, because so often Disney comic relief side characters fall into they're just an idiot, and Baymax is clearly not that, but you still get the kind of adorable and charming humour from just a simple, naive character. During this sequence, Hiro notices that one of the microbots from his pocket is activated. It's clearly being drawn to the others, which makes no sense because they were all destroyed in the fire, so it must just be bugged. Puts it in a dish, seals it, and it's clearly wanting to go somewhere. Baymax sees this and is like, I think it's trying to go somewhere, and Hiro's just, you know, very dismissively, all right, you go see where it wants to go. And Baymax, thinking this will help Hiro, that's what Baymax has been activated to do, to help Hiro, actually goes and does this. Again, it's that naivety and the simplicity of Baymax is just following their programming and their protocol. And we get this really nice sequence of Baymax wandering through the streets of San Francisco, following this kind of pseudo compass that they've made. And I think it's just a really nice sequence. Again, in a lesser film, they would have turned it into this big action sequence, whereas instead we focus in on this very slow, simple character walking through the streets, and the action is happening around them from the world reacting and trying not to bump into them. Eventually, they get to a warehouse and realise this is the source of what is drawing the microbot in. They break in and see that someone is mass producing these microbots, only to be attacked by a character in all black except for a Kabuki mask with a particularly distinct nose. Here's the thing. I know you said about spoilers with Alistair Krei, but that's clearly not Alistair Krei under that mask.
So I'm going to assume by this point everyone's either seen this film or doesn't care about the plot. So this is character, I think they're referred to as yokai in a lot of the material. I don't think they were called yokai in the film. But this is our twist villain. Now obviously the setup is, or the fake out is, we've talked about Alistair Krei being this sort of fake out villain. And obviously there's a character we know Hiro desperately misses and is trying to find, who is effectively missing but presumed dead. So as a cynical audience, we think, it's going to be Tadashi under the mask, and it's not when we eventually get to that reveal. I love the design of yokai. Again, I think it's simple, it's a really good villain design, and the microbots, in that first scene where they're with Hiro, they just look so creative and fun and positive, and in this, they're absolutely terrifying, this tidal wave of spiky death.
I have to agree. When I was watching this today, I thought, my word, what a great supervillain design. A masked character controlling just a swarm of tiny robots, and the way you could do these really interesting action sequences with them. Like as they will ride through the streets of San Francisco, almost riding like a wave or a tsunami of these microbots, and you can use them to attack. And it's just so creative and so completely unique visually for a design of a villain.
And again, this is super tense. There's obviously this element of mystery as to where have these come from, who's making them, who's the man in the mask. And still, Baymax is incredibly lovable and funny. Hiro's legging it away from this wall of death, and he turns around and Baymax is just sort of bobbling along, and he says, "I am not fast." Eventually, they jump out the window. Baymax saves Hiro with a hug as they fall, which is a visual that I saw in a lot of the trailers. And I was like, yeah, it's a nice moment. And I was like, actually, this is the best visual metaphor for what this film is about. A young man falling and Baymax being there to catch him and hold him and save him physically and emotionally. And I was like, yep, that's what this film is about.
Escaping with their lives then, Hiro and Baymax go to report this to the police, who seem very dismissive of this concept, despite the fact there is a giant robot also reporting this to the police. I feel like this police officer doesn't exist in the world of San Francisco.
It's strange, isn't it? Like, oh, you know that fire that happened a few weeks ago where all that robot tech disappeared and 2 people died? I think I found where it's gone. Yeah, whatever. I'm going to call your parents, kid.
Obviously not being listened to, they decide to leave. We also get this nice sequence where Baymax is running low on battery, which is interpreted as basically Baymax being a happy drunk, and it's very sweet.
It makes no sense, but they just went, how can we make Baymax even more funny and lovable? We'll make him drunk.
It's one of those moments where I think, this doesn't work and it is a joke for the adults. It's not for the kids. I should hate it, but the execution is so perfect that I can't help but find it incredibly sweet. They manage to get Baymax back to the charging station. Baymax immediately returns to their normal self, and a quick scan of Hiro shows that Hiro is in a better mood, seems to be excited and happy, and says, "It looks like you're doing better. Are you satisfied with your care?" Which has been established as a phrase that, until a patient has said it, Baymax will continue to follow their programming as a healthcare assistant and will do whatever is necessary to treat their patient. But Hiro is like, nope, we need to find this guy and stop them. That's what's going to help me. But before we can do so, you're going to need some upgrades. We've hit that point in the superhero film where they've had their first encounter and failed, so they need to upgrade. Cue another montage and lots of adorable scenes of Baymax squeezing into ill-fitting armour.
Yeah, again, Baymax being the voice of reason is saying, I don't know how armour and karate is going to make me a better healthcare professional and it's making me look less approachable, but Hero's like, no, this is what we need. So, he covers him in armour, gives him a sort of killer secondary program, I guess, that means he has karate as well as all his healthcare abilities. And Baymax, having diagnosed Hiro as grieving rather than just having simple physical pain, identifies the best treatment as contact with loved ones and friends and family. There's a nice joke where he says, I'll contact the people at the lab, and Hiro says, don't, and he says, they've been contacted instantly.
On that note, one thing I think is really lovely, and I don't know why it got me this time watching it, but all of Tadashi's friends send Hiro a message of support. And that's so lovely. Like, they're not his friends, they're Tadashi's friends. They themselves are grieving, but they take the time to say, we need to do something for Hiro, we need to support him, we're going to reach out to him. And I don't know, it really got me this time watching it. I was like, that's so sweet and such a nice touch.
Maybe I'm reading too much into this and giving a little bit more credit than it's due, but my reading of it has been, because as you say, they've only met Hiro once, but I kind of read it as Tadashi is constantly talking about Hiro to them, so even though they've only met him once, they feel like they know him a lot more and a lot closer to him, which again is really good sort of very indirect characterization of Tadashi, because obviously we only get a few minutes of Tadashi before he gets killed off.
I really like that reading of it, because I think one thing the film does quite well is the idea that we are a reflection of the people we spend the most time with. And that's how, we live on after death, is the people, we've affected act and behave in ways influenced and inspired by ourselves. And so not only do they feel they know Hiro because they knew Tadashi? There's also the element that, like, as long as Hiro is there, they'll still have Tadashi in some way. Again, it feels like a bit of a stretch and a read, but one thing I like is that's exactly what happens with Baymax. Baymax is a reflection of the two people who have worked on him. He's got a disc from Tadashi and a disc from Hiro, and he's always going to become a reflection of the people he interacts with. He learns from them.
You mentioned this being the bit that unexpectedly catches you off guard. The bit that catches me off guard is Baymax finding out that Tadashi is dead, because I can deal with Hiro grieving and being sad, but I can't deal with Baymax grieving and being sad because he's too lovable.
There's also a really nice moment in this where Baymax downloads everything they can find on depression and grieving and coping with loss, and immediately hugs Hiro, saying that recommended treatment, etc., and a hug has been shown to help. And the thing is they're right. The hug immediately helps, which is such a nice touch. Like, Hiro instantly perks up and is like, okay, let's get to work.
So Hiro installs Baymax all his upgrades, and he does his little victory fist bump followed by explosion, which is what he used to do with Tadashi. Baymax is unfamiliar with it, so he teaches him it. And what has become Baymax's sort of catchphrase / calling card, and my god is it unbearably adorable. He can't make a noise, so he just goes blabalabala, and oh my god, is it the most lovable thing I've ever seen a character have.
Upgrades installed. Hiro and Baymax take the microbot and go out hunting for the masked Kabuki man, only to stop at the docks.
This isn't going where you think it is, I promise.
But at this point, they are interrupted by all of Tadashi's friends who they've answered the call from Baymax and are like, what are you doing out here? Also, why is that Baymax and why are they dressed in armour?
And whilst this is happening, Yokai the masked man is using his microbots, pulling out these big bits of machinery that have this bird symbol on them, and when he sees them, he immediately tries to kill them. Now, again, we've established we're doing spoilers, so the masked man is actually Professor Callaghan, who we'll get to the reasons why in a second. But I can accept why Yokai's doing what he does and what his big scheme is, but I don't think it's in keeping with any version of Callaghan that he sees his students and the people closest to him, his first thought is they all have to die.
Yeah, as far as twist villains go, this falls more into the Hans category, where the character they present is not the character they are, and there's no hints between the two at all. And I get it, people will put on masks in front of people, but given what Callaghan's arc ends up being about grief, that is not a mask that you put on when you are grieving. Well, maybe it is, where you put on the, I'm just going to go to work and carry on as normal. And that's what we're seeing when we first meet him. But again, that feels maybe a bit too, engaged and excited dealing with his students and meeting Hiro, as opposed to, the bare minimum that I would expect someone. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, I do, absolutely. And I think it works in the first sequence because he's certainly intimidating and Hiro and Baymax absolutely leg it, but I can easily read that as he's being intimidating to scare them off, right? Whereas this sequence, the first thing he does is throw a shipping container directly at them. It's only because Baymax catches it that they don't all die. And that's quite a jump, because even though they're sort of spying on him and following him, they've not really done anything to interfere with his plan, so it feels like quite an extreme reaction.
I will add as well, compared to Hans at least, we do get a mask slip moment with Callaghan, which is when he interacts with Krei at the expo.
Yes, and also it's built and seeded a bit better rather than just him being one character for 90% of the film and then just saying, and now I'm evil and here's how I'm evil and why I'm evil.
To be fair, they only had to build him for, 10% of the film, and then he's killed off. Well, quote, killed off. So yeah, Callaghan, Callaghan.
Should we start calling him Callaghan after they know he's Callaghan? Because maybe that's the better way of doing it.
So the masked man, it's actually Callaghan, chases everyone through the streets. It's a really nice action set piece. One part I really like is the back and forth between Wasabi and Gogo arguing over the driving before Gogo just takes over and we have a full-on car chase going on through the streets of San Francisco, which culminates with them just crashing into the bay and the masked man leaving them for dead. But luckily, they've got everyone's favourite superhero Baymax with them, who removes their armor and, using their inflatable self, carries everyone to safety, where they decide, we need to do something about this guy. We almost died, and Hiro believes they're the one responsible for the fire and Callaghan and Tadashi's death. And so Fred takes them in a bizarre sequence to his mansion to regroup and make a plan.
I know you were very keen to map a late capitalism critique reading onto Wreck-It Ralph. If the rich person being the one who contributes nothing to society in this film isn't that reading, I don't know what is.
Oh, that's excellent. One thing I really like is we see a portrait of Fred's family, and the father is very clearly Stan Lee, working in our Stan Lee cameo for a Marvel film.
I mean, I keep knocking Fred, but actually there is a point to Fred. And he, again, I think a lot of the humour doesn't quite work for me, but the point is that he's the person who loves superheroes and superhero stories and culture. So he takes them to his room that's full of all these comics and toys and models. And he's the one who says, who's the most likely person to be the villain? The billionaire industrialist. So it's got to be Krei. He's the man behind the mask. They all buy into that straight away because that's the narrative they want to map onto it. And so Hiro decides, as you said earlier, what he does is he improves on things, so he's going to make them into superheroes by giving them upgrades, by revisiting the technology they've been working on, but effectively weaponizing it to turn them into superheroes.
I really like this sequence. I think Fred, in a lesser film, would really be considered lampshading, where it's like, oh, superheroes are a bit weird, but we're going to become superheroes, whereas it makes sense. Fred is looking at the world through the lens that he knows, and then they model themselves on superheroes. So it works. It's not a critique or like a knowing jab at superheroes that we've kind of come to expect from the Disney revival. I really like the narrative beat of them explicitly stating it's Krei, because at that point, as an audience, we're like, okay, it's not Krei. I think if they had never said it, it would almost be as if when the reveal does happen, as an audience, we were supposed to go, oh, but I thought it was Krei. Whereas I don't really think anyone necessarily thinks that. Because as I say, the mask is very distinct. It's clearly not Krei beneath the mask. Maybe very young audiences might go down that narrative, but I also don't necessarily think this is a film for very young audiences. And so the characters explicitly stating that is just the kind of final confirmation of like, okay, it's a red herring. I'm fine with that.
And just to be clear, I think 20 years before this film, or a less experienced or less confident studio, or just a set of filmmakers who are less interested in being a bit subversive and experimental, that would be it. I genuinely don't think there would be a twist. It would be, yeah, we set up this character in the first act who's a bit evil. They're a bad guy, and it's that simple, right? Like, hell, most Marvel films, that's what they do.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have this extra layer to them. The Red Skull isn't just someone who's trying to build technology and there's actually another bad guy. The Red Skull is the bad guy. During this montage, and it is another montage, we get the only song in the film. Obviously it's not a musical and this is non-diegetic music, but it's Immortals by Fall Out Boy. I'm not a big Fall Out Boy fan, but man, I think this is a banger, and it has the perfect sound for this film and this aesthetic, because it's got kind of an Eastern idea of what Western culture's like and a Western idea of what Eastern culture's like, and it's a bit sort of high-flying sort of sci-fi tech noise as well. And I think all that comes together, and yeah, it just gets me so pumped up every time. I love it.
Quick question, Ben. Which of the superpowers do you want? I say superpowers, super suits.
Well, I don't really care for Fred's too much, which is a big bouncy fire-breathing monster. Wasabi's seems as much a danger to himself as anybody else, because those incredibly lethal lasers we mentioned earlier are now on the ends of his hands. Honey Lemons is undoubtedly the most incredible, so she's got this little purse that she kind of gets these little chemical balls out of that do different things. Again, really nice touch. The button she presses, it's just the periodic table. So the implication is that she's looking at a problem, thinking what the best chemical compound would be, and then manually putting it together on the fly, which is awesome. But I'm far too stupid for that, so I guess it would either be Go-Go's awesome hover rollerblade and Captain America shield discs, or flying super punchy Baymax.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Hiro for a second there, in which case Hiro's suits is just magnets.
Don't knock it. San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge has been ruined by magnets by at least one supervillain.
But no, the correct answer is Go-Go's super speedster. No friction outfit. It's awesome. Fully upgraded then, Hiro takes the new and improved Baymax 2.0, though really it's like 3.0 because there's already been a 2.0 in the weird little grey suit.
Maybe that's like a 1.5.
He doesn't consider Tadashi's original thing. I made Baymax, right?
That's how I remember it.
They have the plan where Baymax managed to scan the guy in the mask, and so they essentially have his, biometrics, and they can find him, but they'll need to scan the entire city at once. So Hiro's upgraded Baymax's scanners and given him the capability of flight. This child should not be going to university. They should be working for Krei Tech. I'm just saying it. Sorry, you made a team of superheroes in an afternoon. What are we supposed to be teaching you?
It'd be like making Nikola Tesla do an A-level.
And so Hiro, with his magnets, attaches himself to Baymax, and they fly up to take a scan. And my word, this flight sequence. There's a lot of first flight sequences in superhero films. Iron Man's got a pretty good one, but this just takes the cake. It's so good. Visually, it's so gorgeous. Something you can only really do justice with animation, which is the case in live action. Whenever you're seeing a flight sequence, that's animated.
I feel they looked at Cody and Marahute at the start of Rescuers Down Under or A Whole New World, and they went, I raise you everything. I'm just going to say, I think this is probably the best version of this sequence in any Disney film. Yeah, the person I was watching with it just involuntarily said something like, wow, this is amazing. They've seen this film before, but they were just captured by it. The particular moment is they fly up to a big sort of advertising balloon that's tethered to the ground, and Baymax just runs his hand over the cable, and I don't know if it has any deeper meaning. There's no meaning or reading that jumps out to me, but it's just a stunning image.
It's absolutely wonderful, and after this they're on top of said kind of like, it's almost, I think it might be an energy generator, like it's a turbine in the air and it's attached as a cable to provide power. I think that might be what they're going for.
That makes a lot more sense than my suggestion of an advertising blimp.
I mean, they can still put advertisements on it.
Now you're thinking with late today's capitalism.
And Baymax and Hiro are sitting on it, and Baymax notices again that Hiro's mood has improved. He seems much happier and much more at ease than he was when they first met, and is like, are you satisfied with your care? Reminding us that being, quote, a superhero is not Baymax's programming. Their programming is to care for their patient. And it's such a sweet moment that kind of rips you out of the superhero film and back into the, hey, this is a coming-of-age film about a young man dealing with his grief.
And again, as well, we're seeing this through the perspective of two characters, because from Hiro's perspective, yeah, I'm feeling better because I'm getting closer to avenging my brother. Whereas from Baymax's perspective, he's seeing it for what it is, which is you're feeling better because you're doing something constructive and you're being around people you care about. But obviously that's not what Hiro can see yet. So Baymax identifies the masked man, the masked Callaghan, being on an island just off the coast. I assume it's meant to be Alcatraz in this universe, but who knows?
I suppose it would be, wouldn't it? Yeah.
And Baymax flies the 6 of them out to the island, and they're all a bit jumpy at first. The island looks scary. It's got big quarantine signs, which they're not cool with, but they start working their way into what basically seems to be an abandoned laboratory. As
you watch this film, you might think, this looks like the setup to the end of the second act, and you'd be right. Because in the laboratory, our heroes find records linking Krei to the ruins of some experiment here, and they see this data log of Krei testing a teleportation device, and despite some irregularities, everything seems well within the parameters. They go for the pilot test flight, and everything just immediately goes wrong, and the pilot is lost, and the military shut down the project. So everyone naturally assumes Military shut down the project. Krei wants revenge. We need to stop him. At this point, they are attacked by the masked man they came here to apprehend. And what I love about this sequence is it does what a lot of team superhero films fail to do, which is show the team failing because they're not working together. Each of the characters has their own go at trying to apprehend the masked man, and they immediately get overwhelmed. And we've got Wasabi sort of shouting at them going, what's the plan? What are we doing here? We can't do this. Seeing they're getting overwhelmed and inspired by his rage for Tadashi, Hiro guides Baymax, and they just basically immediately take out who they assume to be Krei, knocking the mask off and telling him that he's going to pay for what he did. And it's at this point that we have the reveal that it is not, in fact, Krei, it is Callaghan, as we discussed. And I love this sequence where, realizing what has happened, the man that Tadashi died trying to save is the man responsible for his death. And Callaghan says, that's not on me. He chose to run in.
Yeah, it's a really good, almost 180 basically. Callaghan goes from being this sort of tragic mentor figure to the villain. And even though there is some tragedy there, which we'll get to in a moment, he's unrepentant for it. He says, yep, I took your microbots and I saved myself with them. It's not my fault Tadashi's dead, and I'm glad I'm doing what I'm doing. He's not apologetic or sorry. Again, as you probably know if you listen to this podcast often, I love it when there's this clear parallel between a protagonist and an antagonist, and what we see in a moment draws that very clearly. And that is rage linked to grief, because Hiro has accepted that he's grieving a missing Tadashi, but that's now just turned to pure anger at the person he sees as responsible for it. So he takes out Tadashi's programming of Baymax, leaving only his lethal version. Baymax's eyes turn red, and he is set on Callaghan by Hiro and told to kill him, which Baymax under this programming now tries to do.
I love how genuinely upsetting this sequence is. As I say, I don't think this is a Disney film for very young audiences. I think this is going to upset a lot of people. A lot of children, maybe some people as well, but children aren't people. And what I really love about this is what taking Tadashi's chip out of Baymax represents. Rather than holding on to the memory of his brother, he would rather rip that out and just become lost to his grief. And it's such a kind of, I don't know, it feels like it should be more blunt, but it never comes across as that. By doing it through the character of Baymax as a representation of the relationship between these brothers, I think they get away with it.
Yeah, definitely. There's not a moment where one of the side characters says, Baymax isn't programmed by Tadashi to do that, he's programmed to help. Do you know what I mean? Like, we just get it, and it's simple. We've got the nice green chip and the evil red chip. And it's scary as well. Callaghan goes from being this intimidating, endless figure with these tendrils and this tidal wave of bots to a scared old man running away from a deadly robot. The power change is instant and terrifying.
And alongside this, we've got all of Hiro and Tadashi's friends trying to hold Baymax back and just getting flung aside. And it's so upsetting and so distressing, but Hiro does not care. He is laser focused on his one objective of destroying Callaghan. Luckily, they manage to subdue Baymax by putting Tadashi's chip back inside of them. We get this very upsetting moment where Baymax realizes what they've just done and apologizes to everyone and sort of states that their original programming is back online, at which point Hiro just takes Baymax and abandons everyone on the island.
This is very much Hiro's low point. So he heads back and he realizes the problem is the Tadashi chip that's in Baymax, so he goes about trying to remove it, and Baymax just won't let him. He's just won't let that chip port be open, and Hiro breaks down and kind of accepts that what he's doing isn't going to make him happy. Baymax asks, will eradicating Professor Callaghan make you happy? And Hiro realizes that he's wrong. And the moment that is the turning point is Baymax shows Hiro the video blog of Tadashi trialing and building Baymax to help people, and mentioning how he can't wait to show Hiro.
I feel I've said this a lot during this film, but I really love this sequence. The moment of Baymax telling Hiro this isn't what Tadashi would want, and Hiro saying, well, Tadashi's not here, echoing what he said about his parents at the start, like, when someone is dead, they are gone. And Baymax responding that Tadashi is here and shows the vlogs. Feels weird calling them vlogs. I don't know why I did that.
Shows him the vines.
Hey guys, Baymax test 101. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button.
If you are watching on YouTube, if you could remember to hit the like and subscribe button, that would really help us out.
And we just get this really lovely sequence of what is essentially memories of Tadashi. They're always going to be part of Baymax's programming, and we see Tadashi talking to Baymax, but because of how it's set up and where the screen is, we instead get to see it as Tadashi talking to Hiro and saying that you're going to help so many people. And it's just this lovely, sweet moment and this reminder that actually, as long as you remember people and you continue to live the way they would want you to live, they are still alive in some way through you. And this is such a perfect way of doing that without it being, corny or ham-fisted. It's just perfectly executed.
I think it's the grounded real world, obviously it's a sci-fi version of it, the grounded real world version of Mufasa in the Clouds, where it's that conversation that you wish you could have had and you can't go back to. And yeah, I think it's superb. And this is immediately followed by Wasabi, Honey, Lemon, Go-Go and Fred showing up. And again, narratively, what we're set up for is they're going to give him the talking to, and he's going to go, right, you're right, I need to get my head straight, let's sort this out. And instead, Go-Go, who's the hard ass of the group, just hugs him. And oh my god, does that get me every time, because again, that's what this film is about. And again, it's what Baymax says is needed. And yeah, again, very simple moment, really minor moment, but again, just one of the many nuanced character pieces in this film.
It's at this point as well that we see Callaghan's motivation. We see the rest of the video log, the vlog,
the vines, the TikToks.
We see the rest of the TikTok where we find out that the missing pilot was Callaghan's daughter and he blames Krei for what happened. Which, he's not entirely wrong.
I mean, to be fair to Krei, I don't know if he's that in the wrong. He's obviously just someone who's got a very blamable face. I mean, the parallels aren't exactly subtle, but I also think they're very well handled. Because obviously what we're seeing here is Hiro's accepted the love of those people around him and realises that hate and anger and destroying things doesn't bring the person back and it doesn't make you feel any better. Whereas Callaghan hasn't had that journey, so he's determined to go and destroy Krei.
The best supervillains are always a reflection of the hero. Another thing I love about Big Hero 6 is the villain is also a direct result of the hero. If it wasn't for Hiro and his microbots, Callaghan wouldn't have done what he did. And in our final confrontation, we get that moment between the two of them where after Callaghan has attacked Krei and is telling him, you're responsible, you took everything away from me, I'm going to take everything away from you, constructing the portal above his new campus, and it slowly being sucked up into the portal. Hiro just tells Callaghan it's not going to bring her back, and this isn't going to help. Giving in to your grief isn't going to help. Trust me, I know. And we get this lovely moment where we can see in the animation on Callaghan that he's reflecting on the fact that he's just become to Hiro what Krei is to him. And I get the impression that there is a moment where he's about to stop if it wasn't for fucking Krei interrupting and saying, yeah, listen to the kid.
This is also just a really solid action sequence. So we've got the 6 heroes fighting the now enormous army of microbots that Callaghan has. And he kind of devises a way of incapacitating each of them. And referencing Tadashi earlier and thinking of a new way to deal with it. Rather than them trying to get the mask, they decide they just need to take out the microbots themselves. Everyone has a little moment of thinking their way out of the problem, which again, just nice little message about, hey, being a scientist and engineer and being smart is cool. And they eventually defeat Callaghan, and it's all good, except as the portal collapses to the floor, Baymax points at it and says, I detect life signs within there.
And I feel really stupid that I didn't notice this until watching it today. But Hiro just does exactly what Tadashi did at the start.
Yeah.
When everyone is running away and they've realised that it's Callaghan's daughter who's in the portal and she's still alive, Hiro just says, she's alive in there, somebody has to help her. Really just selling that point that you keep people alive through your memories of them and through your actions, and it's just so lovely.
I feel this finale just keeps escalating. So I already found the Tadashi video and the hug from Gogo very emotional, and then you get this really well done action sequence, has a lot of heart to it, and then you get this and you're like, oh yep, Hiro, he's let go of the anger and he's become the person Tadashi always knew he could be. They journey into the void, which again visually is absolutely gorgeous and totally unlike anything else in the film. They find this pod and Callaghan's daughter's in this cryo sleep, and they start bringing her back, and as they do, they're hit by a bit of wreckage, and the film says, ha, you thought you were done with being emotionally drained, but we are going to give you the biggest possible gut punch we can.
Because in the impact, Baymax's thrusters have been destroyed, but there is one way they can still get out. Baymax braces their fist against the pod, ready to launch it, sacrificing themselves for the sake of Hiro and Callaghan's daughter. And Baymax asks one last time, are you satisfied with your care? And it's the most heartbreaking moment of the film, where Hiro can't let go. He's got to deal with grief one last time in the shortest amount of time, where he has to make the decision to let Baymax go. And he knows whether or not he says it, Baymax is going to launch them to safety. The only thing that matters is whether Baymax has to continue an endless existence in this horrible void.
It's so well done. And to be fair to Hiro, like, well, A, I don't know if I could let Baymax go, but B, like, he's 13, his parents have died tragically, his brother's died tragically, and now his surrogate family member robot is dying tragically, all in a very short space of time. I think he's coping with it exceptionally well.
I will always remember trying to get a housemate of mine to watch this film, and from the opening act, they just didn't particularly care, so they just kind of potted around the house doing whatever and would sort of dip in and out as the film went on. By the end of the second act, they had sort of sat down on a sofa behind me without realising, and I only realised they were there when, at Hiro saying, I am satisfied with their care, I just heard sobbing from behind me.
I'd say it's one of the least cynical, least manipulative and most well-earned Disney tearjerker moments of the whole canon. It's great. And it's horrible. As you say, Hiro accepts it, tells Baymax that he's satisfied with the care he's received, and him and Callaghan's daughter are jettisoned out and brought to safety. Callaghan's arrested. We see both the grief but relief that he sees that his daughter's okay, and then we jump forward.
I really like this time jump. We see a parallel to the start of the semester, where Hiro had previously been not processing his grief and isolating, and now Hiro is signed up with the university and is engaging with the people around him who care for him and is just in a much better place. But there's still this, overtone of loss and grief and sadness still there, because it never really goes away. It's just something you learn to live with. And the thing that I love is that we see that Hiro has kept the fist gauntlet that Baymax launched him to safety with, and we just get this moment where Hiro just looks at it and smiles. And again, it's that idea of, like, as long as you remember the people you've lost, they will still be there. rather than, cutting them out and trying to, ignore the pain and succumbing to the grief. It's just a final moment that is just so lovely. But that's not all.
Because Hiro, kind of half smiling, gives like one last knuckle bump to it, and the fist falls slightly ajar, and we see that Baymax's Tadashi memory chip, which is basically his brain, his personality, is within the fist, and because of it, Baymax never really went away. Hiro rebuilds him, and they're reunited.
If I could change one thing about this film, it's that the film would end either at finding the chip, which I understand why they didn't, or when Baymax is rebooted and says, "Hello, I am Baymax." Cut to credits.
I thought you were going to say it ends with Baymax dead, and I would have burned you at the stake, you monster. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I suppose they wanted a slightly more upbeat, energetic ending, because what we get is Hiro doing a little bit of a sort of closure monologue, talking about them being heroes, leading into, the big Hero 6 end title card. And then over the end credits, we get some nice little kind of visuals of them being superheroes, basically, followed by a weird post-credit sequence where Stan Lee is Fred's dad, and they wear superhero underpants in a disgusting way, and they're going to have a long conversation. And I've made that sound a lot weirder than it is, but it is still quite weird.
To be fair, Stan Lee is saying that he wears his superhero underpants, which go on the outside in the gross way, which I'm kind of fine with. It's Fred wearing his actual underpants in the gross way that I have a problem with.
Yeah, that's fair.
One thing that I hadn't noticed until this most recent watch was that, so the credits have the wonderful storyboard drawings. Instead of showing the events of the film, they're showing kind of like an epilogue of various events happening afterwards. And one of them is the characters at the university at the opening of the Tadashi Hamada building. And I had never noticed it before, and I genuinely cried when I saw it. And it's a moment in the credits. Regarding the end monologue, my biggest problem with it is, and maybe it's me being cynical, but I think it's Disney being cynical, is Big Hero 6 was very much supposed to set up other media. Like, there's a TV show, and they always, at the moment, are like, can we lead into sequels? And ending on Baymax just being like, hello, I am Baymax, doesn't lead nicely into a TV show. You need to tell the kids, hey, Baymax is back properly, and you can see him in the TV show. I kind of hate that, because they've tarnished the film in the name of marketing, which maybe I'm being a bit too cynical there, but I do not like.
I generally don't, but then I think of the Underminer at the end of The Incredibles, which is the best joke in the film. And that is Big Hero 6. Before Liam and I pass final judgment on this film, Liam, is there anything else we need to talk about?
There is just one thing, and oh boy, we are back in a golden age of sexy characters, I would say. Because we need to decide which character in Big Hero 6 is the sexiest. As always, we're referring to characters that we feel are unnecessarily or inappropriately sexualized for a family entertainment film. And I'm going to tweak it a little bit this time, because did you know this film has my absolute favourite human Disney crush? And I want to see if you can guess who it is, because there are many choices.
I mean, my instinct is Wasabi, given how much you liked the Doctor from Atlantis. I would say there's 5 very strong candidates here. So I think Wasabi, Tadashi, Go-Go and Honey Lemon would all be very strong candidates. Knowing you, Liam, I'm going to say, if you're not going for Wasabi, I'm going to say it's Tadashi.
It is Tadashi. I don't know what it is. I think I've got a thing for, like, big brothers, which is worrying on many levels. But my word, Tadashi might be the most handsome character Disney have ever created that is a human.
It's a sexy ant. I feel they're really playing their tropes, but also they've learned from Flynn Rider, where it's like, let's just get a really generic, handsome guy, and that's your Tadashi. Then they've got the buff but sweethearted character in Wasabi. They've got the tall, skinny, blonde, tanned character in Honey Lemon, and then they've got the alternative badass in Go-Go. I suppose the most inappropriately sexy one is Aunt Cass, because she is definitely the Marisa Tomei as Aunt May mold. So I guess I'm going to go for Aunt Cass.
Yeah, and I think, personal opinions aside, she's definitely the character that the internet likes to sexualize more than anyone else.
I mean, I was going to save this for that podcast, but I'm going to have a lot of angry things to say, so I may as well say it now. Apparently in Ralph Breaks the Internet, one of the spam adverts is meet local housewives, and one of the picture is Aunt Cass, which is a weird reference.
That's awful. I'm referring to Ralph Breaks the Internet, of course, but that specific thing you mentioned is also awful. With both Aunt Cass and Tadashi added to the list of sexiest characters, there is just one more list we need to deal with. We need to decide whether or not we think Big Hero 6 deserves a spot on the prestigious list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. Before we can make our decision, though, as protocol dictates, we must first retrieve the scroll. Ben, if you would do the honours.
As I approach the vault which houses the scroll, which details Waly Gisnep's animated classics, I note the building is ablaze, so Liam, if you could just go in and get it, I'll wait out here. So Liam.
Oh, I'm dead now.
Oh, okay. I blame Ralph Breaks the Internet, and I will destroy it in vengeance. So Liam, does Big Hero 6 do enough to make the list?
In regards to overall structure and narrative, there's not that much unique here. It's very much a superhero origin story, and a lot of the beats you will have seen before. It's even a classic boy and his robot story, which there are dozens of. Both of those stories you'll find the same beats you would expect here. But as I said earlier, Disney using that format to tell such a nuanced story about grief and remembering those we've lost was so unexpected and impressive to me. I don't really feel the need to be coy. I think whilst the story beats are not particularly unique, I think the execution of that story and the overall message of this film is just done so perfectly that I absolutely love this film. This is one of my favourite Disney films that I come back to time and time again. And it had been a while, but coming back to it today just reminded me why I love this film. So for me, it is an absolute yes. What about yourself?
When you talk about putting together a list of the absolute best Disney films, there's certain Disney tropes you think of. The big three for me are magic, music, and romance. Those are kind of the three things that I think Disney as a brand is more or less built on. Obviously, you've got things like princesses and animals, but I think those are the three main things. This film doesn't really have any of those things. What it does have is, in the form of Baymax, it has one of the best realised characters on film I'm aware of. It has an incredibly unique aesthetic. The sound is great, the music's great, the voice performances are fantastic. The main characters are so engaging, the side characters are for the most part really strong. And in some ways I think you're selling it a bit short by saying it follows all these beats, because I think there are subversive elements to this story, and the nuance around the grief and the twists and turns and the emotional beats of it are far beyond anything you see in any other superhero movie and in basically any other Disney movie. I honestly, after this third or fourth watch, it's only got stronger for me. I feel very comfortable calling this a genuine masterpiece. I'd say it's one of the strongest Disney films, and for me, not only does it go on the list, it goes in my list of top 5 Disney films. It's superb.
Wow, that is some high praise. I have to echo what you said. I do think it's really good. If you've not seen it, you shouldn't still be listening. And if you have seen it, go watch it again. It's fantastic.
My only other note on it is, how did Wreck-It Ralph get a sequel and this didn't? Although in some ways, I'm kind of glad, because as I say, I think it's basically perfect. So I'd rather it be a perfect thing than be ruined by diminishing returns. As you say, there was a spin-off TV show. There's another TV show coming next year called Baymax. I might watch them, but I kind of don't feel I need to.
It kind of harkens back to the point I made of comparing this to, your Spider-Man films and your Batman films, where they are stories in which grief is the motivation to become a hero. This is a story in which becoming a hero helps a character overcome their grief. At the end of this film, they have overcome their grief. We don't need to follow them anymore. Yeah, they're still a hero, and you can get nice heroic adventures. The Incredibles can go on indefinitely. Big Hero 6 in a similar way can go on indefinitely, but you wouldn't get the nuanced exploration of grief in a sequel. unless someone else died. My vote's for Fred.
But as a franchise, it doesn't need to be about that. If another theme or idea or character element was explored with these characters in this world with the same level of quality and love and nuance, I would eat it up, no doubt. But as I've said many times on this podcast, I'd always rather have something new than a solid but safe sequel. So I'd rather have a Raya and the Last Dragon, which is nowhere near as good as this, but is trying to do something different. I'd rather have that than a Big Hero 7.
And I would rather have a solid and safe sequel than another Ralph Breaks the Internet.
Man, we've slagged it off 4 times, and this isn't even the Wreck-It Ralph podcast.
And so Ralph breaks the internet. And so Big Hero 6 very comfortably makes the list with some incredibly high praise from Ben thrown on top. The list is returned to the vault for another week, but of course, these are just our opinions. Do you think Big Hero 6 does enough to earn its spot as a true classic? Do you think, like Ben, it is one of Disney's best films? Or do you think it relies too much on those superhero origin tropes to tell its story? And we're always interested to hear which character you think is the sexiest and should go on the list of inappropriately sexy characters. Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics is available to listen on Spotify, SoundCloud, and a range of other podcast hosting platforms, with a special enhanced version on YouTube alongside memes and edits and interviews and other videos related to animated films. But talking of animated films, there are always more to discuss. So Ben, what film is up for consideration next time?
Next week, Liam, we are looking at 2016's Zootopia, or as it's known in the UK, Zootropolis, so we're probably going to confuse a lot of people by interchangeably calling it both. I haven't seen this film since I first watched it at the cinema in 2016, so I'm very keen to revisit it. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and make sure to watch along by watching Zootopia/Zootropolis, and join us next time for Waly Gisnep's Animated